Hey everybody, this is John from MTG Nexus coming at you with another deck overview, this time for a more traditional control deck in the modern format, and that is Esper Control. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these quick, informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and let's get into the deck. So Esper Control is kind of a hybridization of the old school control decks that Blue-White Control tries to be, while playing a little bit more of better removal than Blue-White typically has access to. Most of the power of the Esper builds comes from the 3-drop slot that we'll talk about here in a second. But, you get to play a lot of the traditional things. You get to play things like Counterspell, things like Fatal Push, things like Archmage's Charm, just all the control staples that used to be before Modern Horizons 2 came out, and, and Omnath Piles became the control deck du jour. Beyond that, you're still playing things like Jace the Mind Sculptor, you're playing new additions like the Wandering Emperor and Teferi as kind of your win cons. So primarily, you're trying to win the game through card advantage, trading 1-for-1 resources, and just kind of drilling your opponent into the ground like the old school control decks, without things like Wrenn and 6 or Teferi Time Raveler really seeing much play in these lists. The power of the deck really comes down to the black splash spells. Things like Kaya's Guile, the modal cards that allow you to force your opponent to sacrifice creatures, exiling their graveyards, etc. Esper Charm, obviously a very powerful thing. This is an instant speed draw 2 or force your opponent to discard 2. It, much like Archmage's Charm, is a very powerful 3 mana modal spell. And then Void Run, an encounterable destroy target non-land permanent, seems very powerful overall, although a little bit clunky in a format like Modern. Prismatic Ending kind of rounding out the removal spells of this particular version. And then, get to play the 3-color mana base, so you don't get to play quite as many utility lands, but you still get to fit in an Otawaro as kind of your pseudo island. Raffine's Tower, obviously nice because you're playing the 3-color mana base anyway. Creeping Tar Pits as kind of a way to close out the game, a little less mana intensive, and then something like Celestial Colonnade, and then Castle Vantress as just a little bit of card selection in the mid game. And then obviously you get to play a powerful oldie Snapcaster Mage, which has obviously fallen out of favor as it's not the most reliable way to win the game anymore, but still a way to get value from your graveyard. And then Dress Down as a way to deal with some of the liability matchups like Urza's Saga or Elementals, turning them in a little bit worse of what they're doing. One of the powerful reasons to stay in black, obviously, is access to discard spells and disruption, so things like Thoughtseize as a way to disrupt combo or other mid-range decks, Flusterstorm as a way to interact with combo, Fracture as another catch-all spell that's very good against Planeswalkers, obviously it being very nice that it is instant speed, plays with the rest of the deck quite nicely, Dovin's Veto for Counterspell Wars and combo, Mystical Dispute against other blue-based decks, Hallowed Moonlight primarily here for creativity, Celestial Purge because Blood Moon is a real annoyance along with other like red-based decks such as Burn, gives you a nice removal spell on that, Kaya's Guile, very good in the matchups it's very good in, good as an instant speed blowout against things like Living End, good against things like Burn and such, Teferi Time Raveler, because you're in blue and white colors, why would you not play at least one of the best anti-Cascades cards, as well as very good in the control mirrors, and then a second copy of Supreme Verdict, because sometimes you just need sweepers to clean up what's gotten through your permission. Taking a look at a slightly different take on the deck, this one's a little bit less reliant on Planeswalkers, so you're not seeing as much things as Jace the Wandering Emperor. Instead, you're seeing a smattering of other card advantage spells. So you're seeing things like Memory Deluge, you're seeing things like Solitude. This deck is just kind of a smattering of very good spells. You get to play the spell Damn, which is both a removal spell and also a sweeper if you overload it. Quite nice when you're playing a white splash anyway. Tainted Indulgence is an interesting one in this build, allowing you to kind of get more utility out of your Snapcaster Mages while also discarding cards that are kind of useless to you, things like Supreme Verdict against combo deck, etc. Maybe discarding a Fatal Push against a control deck. Very nice utility spell. Not quite as powerful as Expressive Iteration, but, it being instant speed, plays with kind of the instant speed flash deck that this deck is capable of. Obviously, you're seeing a different variation of the 3 spells here, or 3-drop spells. You're not seeing any Esper Charms. Just kind of shows you a little bit of how underexplored this archetype is, even if it's not necessarily the best control option currently out there. Shark Typhoon, also yet another flash speed threat that you can threaten to kill your opponent with. And then Solitude, whenever you're playing a blue-white X deck of some kind, really no reason to leave home without at least one. And then, much with the land base again, I do think it's a little bit low with only 24 lands, but, you still get to play Creeping Tar Pit, Castle Vantress, a Hall of the Storm Giants, and you still get to run a Raffine's Tower, or 2 in this particular list, as both a way against Flood Out, be able to cycle it in the mid-game, while also being able to fix your mana in the early turns while you're setting up. Sideboard, once again, you're going to see a lot of the same things. You're going to see copies of Thoughtseize for any type of creature or any type of combo-based matchup or any type of mid-range control matchup. Test of Talents is an interesting one, allowing you to exile your opponent's key spell like Living End or Crash or Rhino or Crashing Footfalls, etc. Fracture we've already kind of talked about. Very nice answer to Planeswalkers, which otherwise if they get through answer deck could be a little bit awkward. Noxious Grasp is an interesting one. It deals with most white-based Planeswalkers in the control mirrors. Dress Down we've already kind of talked about, being very good against Urza's Saga and against things like Elementals or possibly blinking a Archon when it comes into play. Celestial Purge, this hits a lot of different things. Good for Burn, good for Blood Moon, good against Archon, etc. Kaya's Guile we've already kind of talked about, very powerful modal spell, very good at dealing with a lot of the annoying stuff your opponent might have going on. And Summary Dismissal, this one's good in a lot of random different situations. Mainly against decks like Tron and such, being able to exile, their Eldrazi and its abilities on the stack, or just a bunch of, storm things and everything else. Summary Dismissal is one of not a terrible thing. Obviously, Esper Control is not the best positioned deck in the format. Really, blue-white X control with Leyline Binding, or 4-color Omnath piles with like Renin 6 and Omnath. Really, those decks are more powerful. The advantage this deck has is it has access to the discard spells. The mana's a little bit cleaner. You're not quite as stretched as the Leyline Binding builds, and you kind of get to play a little bit more of a flash game. This is more of the older traditional control decks that were just, react to your opponent, react to your opponent, react to your opponent. Never almost do anything at sorcery speed other than your sweepers, and just kind of overwhelm your opponent over the course of a game. Now, while this deck isn't necessarily the best position in the format, it does give you an alternative to blue-white control with a little bit better removal and a little bit more disruption for the combo matchups, while also still giving you the very powerful white-based utility spells, Supreme Verdict, Teferi, Solitude, etc. So this is a very powerful element, and a deck I think is a little bit underexplored, but obviously, for reasons, it's just not the best position anymore. Blue-white even has had struggles over time, so it stands to reason that a deck was similar to blue-white, but with a little bit more utility, also struggles. But it is a deck that, a skilled pilot can take and do well with, especially at a local meta where you can just kind of, game plan for your opponent. And you do have access to these powerful 3-mana spells, whether it be Kaya's Guile, Void Rend, Esper Charm, these other spells that are a little bit underexplored, and, a lot of people aren't really prepared for, this attrition game, and then, like, maybe turn 7, having their hand discarded during a draw step. It's just not something you see a lot of out of blue-white X control. So, Tainted Indulgence, like I said, this deck has a lot of options, a lot of things you can splash, and, even something like 3-mana Kaya, as far as like a one of out of the sideboard, Planeswalker. You can bring in things like Ashiok, Dream Runner for things like Amulet and such. There's a lot of different things you can do with this deck, and I do think it's a little bit underexplored. But obviously, like I said, it's probably not the best well-positioned, since even blue-white control hasn't been that particularly well-positioned in the format for some time. But, a deck with a control deck with a little bit of splash, a little bit of flair, a little bit of pizzazz, always nice in the format. And is be a deck you should be aware of. Maybe you have an Esper pilot in your local meta, and this gives you a little bit of heads up of what some of the stuff they might be running. But, as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what deck you might like to see us cover in the next video.